Well, I've started the quilting. Come join me. Hey guys, welcome back to Frances Quilts. Now in yesterday's blog post, I was trying to decide how to start my quilting on this piece. I had a bunch of decisions that I needed to make, and I walked you through the process of how I made those decisions. If you're interested in seeing that, please check out the blog. It's at francesquilts.com/blog. At the end of that post, I promised you quilting today, so here is some of the quilting that I did on this piece. So I'm starting the quilting on the Dreamcatcher. I decided to double the lines that were in the piece. So I had originally drawn on the lines that had the circles on them, which I'm also not using. And then when I added the lines in between, I realized that I had messed it up somewhat. So I decided instead of quilting just all the lines in sequence, I was going to go with the ones that were drawn originally and then go back in and fill in with the other lines. So here I am just starting with the quilting. Starting from the center, quilting out to that edge, and just following each one of those little petal areas, following it down to finish that, and then go to the next one that has the circles on it, which indicates it's the original arc. You can see that I am turning the quilt almost every time before I sew. I know that I'm going to get smoother arcs if I am quilting forwards and backwards rather than side to side. So since this is a small piece and since I can turn it, I am turning it every time before I sew. And there you can see pretty much every time I am tracing the arc just to make sure that I know exactly where I'm going before I start quilting. I'm using a wool batting again, hoping that it will give a nice puff to the areas that are not quilted. And I really just love quilting on wool. It is so nice to do. I say it's like quilting on butter. I'm sure you're looking at this circle in the center and going, man, she's making a mess of that. And yes, I am. My intent is to applique a piece of fabric over that circle in the center, so I'm not too worried about what it looks like. And you'll see at the end of the video, I actually do a little bit of work to try to clean it up a little bit. So once I had finished all of the lines that had circles in them, I started doing the alternating lines. And I could see, as long as I was splitting two lines that I had already quilted, I knew that I was in the right place with them. And yes, there are several that I had messed up on, so it was good that I did it this way. So again, I'm going and finding the next arc and making sure I know exactly where I'm going before I start sewing. And even after all of this, when I thought I was completely through, I realized that there was one arc that I had missed, and I had to go back in and quilt that one later. Yeah, that center looks really bad right now. When I had finished all of that, it was time to quilt the outer edge. I started to use a ruler to do this. I have a ruler that the arc is almost right, but not quite. But I finally decided that I was doing really well with just freehanding, so I just did that on the inside circle. When I got to the outside circle, I realized that I had not marked it very well, and there were places where it was wider than it was in other areas. I should have spent more time marking it and I wouldn't have had quite as much trouble. But anyway, I ended up actually using my ruler here just because I could do some measurements and could tell where I was, just to make sure that everything stayed at the same distance apart. Again, if I had been more careful with my marking, I wouldn't have had this problem. When I got to the end, I decided that I wanted to give some weight to these two lines that were the outside edge. So I decided to quilt over them again. And you can see here as I start, I'm quilting much slower. Even when I speed up here in a minute, I'm still quilting slower than I normally do. And that's just because I wanted to make sure that I was actually hitting the line that I had quilted before. So now we've made it all the way back around to the other side. This is the double quilting on that outside edge, and now it was time, you guessed it, to double quilt over that inside line as well. This one was especially important because there are places where those arcs came up into the line that maybe I didn't hit it exactly right, and this gave me a chance just to kind of even things out a little bit. So now let's deal with this circle. The main thing here is I want it to look relatively okay from the back. The top, none of this is going to show because there's going to be a piece of fabric appliqued over the top, but I don't want anybody, particularly a judge, let's be honest, to look at the back and be able to say, wow, she really did a bad job of this. So my idea was just to quilt over that outside edge a few times, and then just to have a little bit of quilting on the back, I went ahead and just did a little spiral in here. But remember, that's all going to be covered up. Now it was time to do the design in the border there, and I had decided to do an arrow design. I started out with that chartreuse color and then realized that you couldn't see it. So I had to go back and change to the dark pink color, and that shows much, much better. My first step was to quilt in the middle of the ditch that I had quilted previously. And when I got around to the edge, it was time now to start actually quilting the arrow designs. I worried at first about keeping them all very symmetrical and even. And finally I decided, it's not going to hurt if there is a little bit of variation in them. So I quit worrying about it as much at that point. What I'm doing is just quilting up the center line about 1/4 of an inch, and then quilting to one side and back, and then to the other side and back, and then coming back to the center. This was actually kind of fun to quilt. So my Dreamcatcher was quilted. I wanted to get rid of some of the blue lines, and you guys know how I've had trouble with fabrics bleeding recently. So I didn't want to get any water on the pieced part, so I covered those up and spritzed it. So here you can see it without the lines, and I think it really looks good. I'm very pleased with it. And the final thing that I did on this first day of quilting is, because I wasn't sure exactly what I'm doing with the feathers, I went ahead and quilted some of the straight lines, and I'm very pleased with how they look. I'm starting out at 1/2 an inch. I may go in and quilt over them a second time and go to 1/4 of an inch, but we'll just see when we get there. Well, I had a lot of fun quilting on this. This has been a hard process because I don't know exactly what I want to do. And so there's been a lot of having to stop and think about it and change my mind about what I was going to do and start over with something else. And so I think I'm finally on track now, and I'm looking forward to getting this quilt finished. You saw towards the end there, I was using a ruler in my quilting. If you're interested in ruler quilting but don't know where to start, the best place is with a straight edge ruler. And I have a course called Keeping It Straight, 8 ways to use a straight edge ruler. Believe me, it is easy, it will help your quilting, and you will love working with them. So you might check that course out. I'll leave the link here and then also in the show notes. Well, I need to get back to quilting, so I'm going to say goodbye for now. Thanks for joining me on Frances Quilts.